Peace to everybody. This is breaking news. NYPD fires Officer Daniel Pantaleo for chokehold in Eric Garner's death. And of course, as you can see here is Daniel Pantaleo. He has been fired from NYPD. He will no longer be allowed to work on the force again after what he has done to Eric Garner. Daniel Pantaleo, the New York City police officer seen on video using a chokehold during Eric Garner's deadly arrest 5 years ago, sparking mass protests, was fired by the department, the police commissioner said Monday. So yes, Daniel Pantaleo has been fired. He is not going to be working anymore after what he did to Eric Garner 5 years ago, sparking a mass protest, was fired by the department. This is what the police commissioner said today. Administrative judge this month recommended that Pantaleo be terminated over the July 17, 2014 confrontation as Garner was being arrested on Staten Island for selling loose untaxed cigarettes. So there was a judge, it was administrative, he recommended that Pantaleo be terminated, and of course that happened. Over the July 17, 24 confrontation as Eric Garner was being arrested. Now, Eric Garner was allegedly selling loose cigarettes, and of course it was untaxed, and he was arrested on Staten Island. Pantaleo, who has been with the NYPD since 2006, was suspended as soon as the departmental verdict was reached, in keeping with long-standing practice. When there is a recommendation for firing, the 13-year veteran had been on desk duty as his case made his way through legal and administrative circles. So Pantaleo has been working with the NYPD since 2006, so that's a very long time. He's been with the New York Police Department, and of course he was working there for 13 years, and had been on desk duty ever since that case was going through because he was suspended. The NYPD's number 2 official, First Deputy Commissioner Benjamin Tucker, accepted the judge's ruling that Pantaleo should be fired. 2 law enforcement officials familiar with the case told NBC New York last week. So there was NYPD's number 2 official, First Deputy Commissioner Benjamin Tucker. He accepted the judge's ruling, and that Pantaleo should be fired. So he is no longer going to be working for the NYPD no more, like I said. The officials familiar with the case told the NBC News last week. Tucker reviewed the findings and had passed them on to Commissioner James O'Neill for his final review. Sources said Tucker reportedly found no new evidence to reverse the judge's decision. So there's no new evidence to reverse the judge's decision whatsoever. Once the judge made up his mind, that was it. It has to go through, no matter what. Tucker reviewed the findings and had passed them on to the Commissioner James O'Neill for his final review. And of course, Tucker couldn't find anything. And of course, here is the protests that happened in 2019 last month, that this was Eric Garner who was choked out by a police officer, Daniel Pantaleo. And of course, Eric Garner has been gone now for 5 years. Patrick J Lynch, president of the city's Petroleum's Benevolent Association, warned O'Neill that Pantaleo's termination would be a moral blow to his members. So you got Patrick J. Lynch. He is the president of the city's patrolmen's, Ben the Violent Association. And of course he warned Pantaleos termination would be a moral blow to his members, and whether he likes it or not, it don't matter. He will lose his police department, Lynch had said. A Staten Island grand jury declined to indict Pantaleo, and earlier this summer, the Justice Department said it would not bring federal civil rights or criminal charges against the NYPD officer. And of course, the jury refused to indict him. They declined it. They said, no, we're not going to indict him. Well, guess what? The judge took over, and the judge had ruled that he should be fired. And of course, it wasn't easy, but it had to be done. And of course, it says he will lose his police department, Lynch had said. Well, if it loses their police department, then, they shouldn't be having people on the police force choking out people that they had no right to do. Pantaleo was among two officers who were initially confronting Garner, 43, about his alleged sale of cigarettes in an incident captured on bystander Ramsey Orta's cell phone. So the bystander had recorded everything on his cell phone, and of course, cameras don't lie. Pantaleo was among two officers who was initially confronting Gardner, and Gardner was 43 at the time. And of course, Eric Garner was alleged sale of cigarettes. As backup arrived, Pantaleo jumped on Gardner's back, wrapped his left forearm around the suspect's neck, and rode him to the pavement. So Pantaleo did wrap his left forearm around the suspect's neck, in other words, Eric Garner's, and rode him to pavement. So he was struggling Gardner to the pavement. And it's just terrible that these police officers are not doing their jobs right, because they got to use violence just to take somebody down. And of course, this is Police Commissioner James O'Neill. It was during a press conference in New York on September 18th, 2016. Four other officers came to assist Pantaleo as he shoved Gardner's face into the sidewalk, all while the 6'2", roughly 400-pound man repeatedly pleaded, "I can't breathe." So Eric Garner was 6'2". Allegedly, he was 400 pounds. And of course, these four other officers, they helped Pantaleo shove him to the ground into the sidewalk. And of course, Eric Garner kept pleading, "I can't breathe." So that means Eric Garner had asthma, and it's not really easy to breathe when you have it. The Office of the Chief Medical Examiner of New York ruled Gardner's death a homicide based on compression of his neck and chest, though the forensic investigators also said Gardner's acute and chronic bronchial asthma, obesity, and heart disease were contributing factors. So this is what the officers did. They did, it was compression of the neck, and of course, homicide on top of it. Gardner's acute chronic bronchial asthma, obesity, and heart disease were contributing to the factors. So Eric Garner had a lot of health problems that these officers would not back off of him at all. About 5 months after Garner's death, a Staten Island grand jury declined to indict Pantaleo based on the evidence presented by the office of then District Attorney Dan Donovan. Now, okay, if there was evidence, which allegedly there was, why didn't they just back off of Eric Garner if they knew he had health problems? And why did the grand jury of Staten Island decline to indict Pantaleo? Because they were paid off not to say nothing. They were paid off, oh, we're not going to indict him. So this is exactly what happened. You pay people off not to indict certain officers. And of course, Pantaleo was never indicted for the homicide of Eric Garner because they just let him up and walk. The borough's top prosecutor, Donovan, insisted he presented all the evidence, though transcripts of grand jury proceedings have never been released. So the grand jury proceedings were never ever released because they decided not to press charges on Pantaleo. They just decided, oh, we're just going to let him walk. He did what he did, and we can't do nothing about it. So we're just going to let him walk. Well, you know what? The jury are just as crooked as any judge or court is in all of this mess. The borough's top prosecutor, Donovan, insisted he presented all the evidence, allegedly. Earlier this summer, federal prosecutors ended their 5-year-long probe of the matter and elected not to pursue any civil rights charges against Pantaleo. Attorney General William Barr made the final decision not to charge Pantaleo, choosing to follow recommendations of Brooklyn prosecutors. A senior Justice Department official told NBC News in July. Now, William Barr, I don't know what he's got to do with all this, but he should have known better that this was going on. But instead, William Barr wanted to be stupid and stay out of it and decided, oh, well, we're not going to press charges on him. So why is William Barr even an attorney general then? And of course, earlier this summer, federal prosecutors ended their 5-year-long probe. And of course, you know the 5-year-long probe, that means everything is covered up. And the matter of elected not to pursue any civil rights charges against Pantaleos. So they did not want to do anything at all. So everything was covered up. They said, oh, well, he doesn't know. Eric Garner did not, because Eric Garner said he could not breathe. That means he had health problems. Asthma is a health problem. There is no cure for asthma whatsoever. At Pantaleo's departmental trial, his defense insisted the officer did not employ a chokehold, which is banned by the NYPD. Instead, Pantaleo's defense argued he was using seatbelt move, wrapping arms around a suspect's shoulders to bring an arrest. Now here comes the lame excuse. Seatbelt move? Really? Come on. Everybody knew what was on those tapes, that Pantaleo had used a chokehold, and he's lying saying, oh, it was a seatbelt move. That's a lame excuse. And of course, wrapping arms around a suspect's shoulder to bring an arrest. I do not believe that part at all about the seatbelt move, because that's a lie. It was a chokehold. And of course, they banned it in New York police departments, but instead they still used it. I Can't Breathe became a rallying call for protest that summer by Black Lives Matter activists, and of course, yes, it has become a thing at the rally. I can't breathe. And of course, the Black Lives Matter, activists has done this. Garner's death came less than a month before Michael Brown, an unarmed 18-year-old African-American man, was fatally shot by police officer Darren Wilson in Ferguson, Missouri. So a month later, after Eric Garner's death, came 18-year-old Michael Brown. He was unarmed. And of course, the police are going to lie and say, oh, well, he had a gun, he had this and had that. How can he if he's unarmed? There was no gun in his possession whatsoever. And Darren Wilson was the one who killed Michael Brown, allegedly. Garner and Brown's deaths became flashpoints for coast-to-coast protests against police brutality and systemic racism. Staffers working for members of the Congressional Black Caucus staged a walkout on December 11, 2014, in protest of Garner and Brown's deaths and the lack of local prosecution of the police officers involved. So they have done a walkout. They did a of course the police, they do everything. They beat you no matter what. There was a police brutality and systematic racism. Staffers working for members of the Congressional Black Caucus staged a walkout on December 11, 2014. Now, why would they do something like this? Because, racism does still exist. It really does. And of course, with Gardner Brown's deaths and the lack of local prosecution of the police officers involved. So this is why Pantaleo never got indicted by the grand jury. They decided to let him walk. Darren Wilson, I do believe they might have let him walk, or they had arrested him. Or got sent to jail. I don't remember. But all these police cover-ups, they're lying on their police reports saying, oh, well, he did this to me and he didn't. No, it did not happen. Eric Garner was in a chokehold after NYPD banned it. And then the officer saying, oh, well, I used the seatbelt move. That's a lame excuse to use a seatbelt hold. That was not true at all, because everybody knew what was happening to Eric Garner. And I pray that his family does get a lot of healing, because this is what the family needs right now. Leave your comments below. I am out.